A catastrophic billion-dollar flood hits the nation's largest city. And for most people, it's just the beginning of their nightmare. For over 1 million homeowners in Ontario, this isn't a story about property damage. It's a story about total financial ruin. They live in homes quietly blacklisted by insurance companies, built in places that were never supposed to flood. Except now, they do. And the maps they trusted to keep them safe, the very documents they checked before buying their dream house, were based on a world that no longer exists. A world from 1991. The foundation of their security is a lie, written on paper 30 years out of date. And what most people don't realize is that for every single dollar an insurance company pays out, 2 more dollars are lost. Paid for by you, by taxpayers, by unprepared families whose life savings are wiped out in a single afternoon. We are looking at a hidden crisis of liability and loss that is an order of magnitude larger than anything being reported. The question is no longer if another biblical flood will hit. The question is, what happens when an entire generation of homeowners discovers the piece of paper that says their house is safe is worthless, and who will be left to pay the bill? Now, before we expose just how deep this goes, I want you to think about someone you know who lives in a newer subdivision, maybe in the Greater Toronto area. This video might be the most important thing they see all year. If that sounds shocking, leave a comment below and tell me the first thing that comes to mind when you hear urban flood. Let's see if it matches the reality. And one more thing. A lot of you watch our videos, which we appreciate, but less than 10% of you are subscribed. That means when we release an investigation like this one, the algorithm often buries it. To make sure these stories reach the people who need them most, you have to subscribe. It's the only way to fight back against the noise and make sure this information gets out. It's an emergency button for the truth. So please, hit that button now. It is genuinely that important. Let's begin. Ontario was never supposed to have this problem. The province was home to a system so brilliant, so forward-thinking, it was once studied around the world. To understand how that system broke, you have to go back to October 15th, 1954. You have to go back to Hazel. Hurricane Hazel was a meteorological ghost, a storm that should have died out over the Carolinas, but instead held its strength. Defied all predictions, and slammed into the city of Toronto with the force of a Category 1 hurricane. Rivers like the Humber, normally calm and picturesque, became violent torrents. A street in Woodbridge, Raymore Drive, was literally erased from the map. Homes, bridges, families, gone in the end. 81 people lost their lives in a single night. The storm was a trauma carved into the province's memory. And from that trauma, an idea was born. A provincially mandated, regionally focused system of 36 conservation authorities. Their job was simple and absolute. Identify the floodplains, the low-lying areas next to every river and creek. And then, stop people from building there. It was a deal with nature, written in the language of zoning laws and development permits. The conservation authorities would draw lines on a map based on the worst-case scenario they had ever seen. The regulatory storm, forever modeled on Hurricane Hazel's fury. Inside that line, no new homes. Outside that line, you were safe. For decades, it worked. The system was a fortress. It held back the water, it protected the people, and it gave an entire province a sense of unshakable security. It solved the problem of rivers bursting their banks, what scientists call fluvial flooding. And that was the flaw. A flaw nobody saw coming. The system was designed to fight the last war. It was built for a province of towns and farms and forests. It was not built for the Ontario of today. The province did not stand still. After 1954, it exploded. The Greater Toronto area sprawled outwards in every direction, a relentless tide of concrete, asphalt, and steel. Farmland became subdivisions, forests became shopping malls, And most critically, wetlands became parking lots. Over 70% of southern Ontario's original wetlands have been destroyed. In the Gita and parts of the southwest, that number skyrockets to over 85%. These wetlands were nature's sponges. They held rainwater, slowed it down, and released it gently into the watershed. We paved them over. We replaced them with impervious surfaces that do the exact opposite. Concrete doesn't absorb. It sheds. It accelerates. A rainstorm that once would have been soaked up by a marsh now hits a concrete bowl and has nowhere to go, except down and sideways. This created a new kind of flood, a danger the 1954 system was completely blind to. Pluvial flooding. This isn't about a river overtopping its banks miles away. This is about rain falling so fast, so intensely, right on top of your neighborhood that the local storm sewers, many of them decades old, simply cannot handle the volume. They choke. The water backs up, shooting out of manholes, pouring over curbs, and running overland down your street. Worse, it forces its way backward through the pipes and into your basement. This is the new threat. The flood that can happen anywhere, miles from any river, miles from any floodplain on a map. And the maps are the heart of the deception. Conservation Ontario, the umbrella group for all 36 authorities, estimates that somewhere between 74 and 78% of the province's official floodplain maps are outdated. Outdated isn't a strong enough word. Many of them haven't been meaningfully updated since 1991, before the explosion of urban sprawl reshaped the landscape, before climate change began turbocharging our storm systems. A homebuyer in 2026, doing their due diligence, pulls up an official map to check their flood risk. They see their property is safely outside the hazard zone. What they don't see is the fine print. The invisible asterisk that says this map was drawn 35 years ago, based on a completely different climate and a completely different geography, before 85% of the natural sponges in their region were dug up and paved over. It is a phantom baseline, a promise of safety based on a world that is gone. Blair Feltmate, head of the Intact Center on Climate Adaptation at the University of Waterloo, is one of the nation's leading experts on this, and his warnings are blunt. He says Canada's flood maps are, on average, 20 to 25 years out of date. He describes a system where municipalities, hungry for tax revenue, can approve new subdivisions in vulnerable areas, simply because an old, obsolete map tells them it's safe. When large precipitation events occur, Feltmate has said, what we don't have is a good delineation on where water is going to go. And that's particularly true in urban and suburban areas. The fortress built after Hazel was designed to protect us from the rivers. It offers almost no protection from the sky. And now, the sky is falling with a regularity and an intensity we have never seen before. This brings us to one of the most terrifying and least understood parts of this crisis: the insurance gap. If your basement floods tomorrow because a city sewer backed up and poured water down your street, do you think you're covered? Most people do, and most people are wrong. This is a good moment to pause. If you are a homeowner, go check your insurance policy right now. Find the section on water damage. I want you to comment below and tell us what you find. Does it specifically mention overland flooding or sewer backup? You might be surprised. It's a vital piece of information that could save you from financial devastation. Standard home insurance policies were designed to cover things like a burst pipe inside your walls. They explicitly exclude what is called overland flooding, water from rain or a river that enters your home from the outside. To get that coverage, you need to buy a special add-on, an expensive rider. And here is the brutal catch. Insurance companies are not charities. They are businesses built on calculating risk. And they have been calculating. They know where the risk is. And if their data shows your home is in a high-risk area, they will simply refuse to sell you that coverage at any price. This has created a silent, growing class of citizens. The uninsurables. according to a chilling report from the Canadian Climate Institute. Co-authored by their Director of Adaptation, Ryan Ness, over 1.5 million homes in Canada, roughly 10% of the entire housing market, are now located in high-risk flood zones. Many of them are functionally ineligible for affordable, or in some cases any, overland flood insurance. They are living without a safety net, in homes that represent their entire life savings. When the water comes, and it will come, they will be on their own. The government's Disaster Financial Assistance Arrangements, or DFA, are not a bailout. They are a program of last resort, meant for essential survival. They provide a fraction of the cost to rebuild. They do not cover replacement value. They will not make you whole. They are designed to prevent total destitution, not to restore your life. This leads to the number that exposes the true scale of the crisis, a number known as the uninsured multiplier. Insurers and climate economists estimate that for every $1 an insurance company pays out for flood damage, there are at least $2 in uninsured losses that are borne directly by households and taxpayers. Think about that. The summer of 2024 was the single most destructive season for insured weather losses in Canadian history, totaling over $7.1 billion. The flash floods that tore through Toronto and southern Ontario on July 15th and 16th accounted for $991 million of that. The headlines all screamed it. $1 billion disaster. But that was just the insured portion. That was just the tip of the iceberg. Using the 2-to-1 multiplier, the real cost of that single storm was closer to $3 billion. $2 billion in damage that was not covered by insurance. $2 billion in mortgages on ruined houses that still have to be paid. In repairs paid for by second mortgages, by drained retirement funds, by parents' savings, by people, not by corporations. This is the hidden economic catastrophe. Joanna Iquam, a leading expert at the Intact Center, put it in stark, unforgettable terms. Something like 10% of residents in Canada are in high-risk zones, she stated. We are not necessarily going to be able to defend those people. Not that we might struggle, not that it will be difficult, that we are not necessarily going to be able to defend them. Now remember that family member you thought of at the start? The one living in a new suburb? This might be the time to send them this video. Just hit the share button. And if you're finding this information valuable, take a second to hit the like button. It tells the algorithm that this is a conversation worth having, and it helps get this warning out to more families who might be living in these hidden danger zones without even knowing it. The night of July 15th, 2024, was the moment the theoretical became terrifyingly real. It wasn't a hurricane. It wasn't a named storm. It was just a weather system that stalled over the greater Toronto area and opened up. It was a pluvial event of biblical proportions. At Toronto Pearson Airport, 123 millimeters of rain were recorded. That's nearly 5 inches. Most of it fell in just a few hours. The city's infrastructure, engineered for predictable, manageable 20th century rainfall, stood no chance. This wasn't like Hurricane Hazel, where overflowing rivers were the primary villain. This was a city drowning in its own runoff. On highways like the 401 and the Don Valley Parkway, drivers were trapped in their cars as the roads transformed into canals. Videos showed water cascading down subway station stairs, turning transit tunnels into subterranean rivers. But the real devastation was happening silently, in thousands of basements across Toronto, Mississauga, and the surrounding suburbs. Homeowners watched in horror as water started pouring in, not through the windows, but up from the floor drains. The municipal storm sewers were so overwhelmed that they were acting in reverse, vomiting a disgusting cocktail of rainwater and raw sewage back into the very homes they were meant to protect. This was the pluvial nightmare made manifest. Homes miles away from the Don River, the Humber, or Etobicoke Creek were flooding catastrophically. The old maps, the ones based on river and floodplains, were useless. They offered zero warning. because the threat wasn't coming from the river. It was coming from above and from below. Laura Twidle, the CEO of Catastrophe Indices and Quantification Inc., the organization that officially tracks these numbers, confirmed the final insured tally, $991 million. An almost unbelievable figure for a single, localized summer storm. And then, as if to prove it wasn't a fluke, it happened again. Just weeks later, on August 17th and 18th, another series of intense thunderstorms parked over Mississauga and Etobicoke, adding another 100 million plus to the regional damage bill. This was no longer a once-in-a-century event. This was a pattern. This was the new normal. The climate had changed. The storms had changed. The very nature of flooding in Ontario had changed. But the maps, the regulations, and the public's understanding of their own risk had not. They were stuck in 1991, the year the original Super Nintendo came out. That is the technology level of the risk assessment protecting millions of homes. This all begs an obvious, infuriating question. If the maps are so dangerously out of date, why hasn't anyone updated them? The answer is a toxic mix of money, politics, and a concept some have called weaponized ignorance. Imagine you are the mayor of a small, growing town. You need to expand your tax base to pay for services. A developer wants to build a new 500-home subdivision on a piece of land at the edge of town. According to the official flood map, drawn in 1988, the land is perfectly safe. But you've seen the new rainfall patterns. You know that area gets swamped after a heavy downpour. If you commission a new modern flood map study, and it shows that land is now a high-risk pluvial flood zone, the game changes. You can no longer legally approve that development. You lose hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, in future tax revenue. Property values for existing homes nearby could plummet. Local real estate agents would be furious. So what do you do? For many municipalities, the answer is simple. You don't commission the study. You stick with the old map. You plead ignorance. You approve the development. The homes get built, people move in, and the town collects the taxes. Everyone is happy until the day 100 millimeters of rain falls in 2 hours, and that entire subdivision becomes a swamp. As Blair Feltmate warns, in some cases, you have a mayor or council that may not even believe climate change is real. They can allow homes to be built in vulnerable areas simply because flooding hasn't happened there yet. It's a perverse incentive. Municipalities have a direct financial reason not to know the truth. Because the truth is expensive. The truth gets in the way of growth. This deliberate inaction goes all the way to the top. In January 2022, the federal government, recognizing the national crisis of outdated maps, launched the Flood Hazard Identification and Mapping Program, or FIMP. It was a massive, multi-million-dollar initiative designed to finally bring Canada's flood risk assessment into the 21st century, with a target of completing the work by 2028. It was the solution everyone had been waiting for. Except, it's failing. On May 4th, 2026, Jerry V. DeMarco, the Federal Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development, released a scathing audit report. His findings were a damning indictment of the entire program. He found that Natural Resources Canada and Public Safety Canada, the two departments in charge, were dramatically behind schedule. They had no hope of meeting their 2028 deadline. Worse, the few maps that were being produced were already flawed. The audit condemned the government for failing to ensure the new maps adequately incorporated projections for future climate change. They were drawing new maps based on yesterday's weather, rendering them nearly useless for the long-term planning decisions, 30-year mortgages, 50-year infrastructure projects that they were supposed to inform. DeMarco's conclusion was brutal and direct. Canadians face escalating risks and higher disaster recovery costs in the absence of up-to-date information. The very program created to end the era of ignorance was failing, perpetuating the same dangerous cycle. By the way, if you're still with me, you're part of a small group that cares about the details. And I know I've asked before, but it matters. Most people who watch this far love our work but forget to subscribe. Think of it this way. Hitting subscribe is your vote. It tells the platform that deep dives like this are more important than the usual noise. So if you haven't yet, please take 1 second and do it. It genuinely helps us continue this work. Okay, I promise, I won't ask again. Maybe. So where does this leave the average homeowner in Ontario? It leaves them in an incredibly precarious position. They are caught in a system-wide failure. The physical landscape has been altered, paving over the natural defenses. The climate has changed, delivering storms of unprecedented intensity. The maps that are supposed to warn them of danger are decades out of date. The insurance industry is quietly backing away, creating a growing population of the financially exposed. And the governments, both local and federal, that are supposed to be fixing the problem, are either incentivized to look the other way or are failing at the execution. It is a perfect storm of vulnerability. The Toronto and Region Conservation Authority, or TRCA, one of the most advanced in the province, has already done the new kind of analysis. They've identified 41 specific flood-vulnerable clusters within their jurisdiction. These are not vague zones on a map. These are specific neighborhoods, specific communities. Within these clusters, they have identified over 41,500 residents and 9,900 buildings that are at direct, immediate risk during a major storm event. This is the reality that the old maps hide. Thousands of people living, sleeping, and raising families in places that the experts know are in the direct path of future floods. The consequences are rippling through the entire economy. Home insurance premiums across Ontario are already projected to climb by another 6.2% in 2026 alone, driven almost entirely by the escalating costs of extreme weather. You don't even have to live in a flood zone to pay the price. The rising tide of risk is lifting all boats, pushing everyone's costs higher as insurers try to build up capital to cover the next billion-dollar disaster. And now, a backlash is beginning. In the spring of 2026, reports began to surface of a phenomenon called flood map fear. As a few municipalities and conservation authorities do manage to produce new accurate maps, they are met with fierce resistance. Homeowners who suddenly find their property newly designated as high risk are terrified. Their property values could crash overnight. Their eligibility for insurance could vanish. They fight the maps. They protest at town council meetings. They demand the authorities stick to the old, comfortable lies. It is a deeply human, deeply irrational reaction. People are choosing to protect their home's equity, on paper, over protecting their home from actual water. They are fighting for the right to remain ignorant, because the truth feels more dangerous than the flood itself. This leaves the 1.5 million uninsurable homeowners in an impossible limbo. They are stranded between a private market that won't cover them and a government safety net that is wholly inadequate. This has effectively created a massive, unfunded social program. Because when disaster strikes, the government will have to step in. Taxpayers across the country will foot the bill for disaster relief. Economists warn this system, where taxpayers are essentially providing free, unlimited flood insurance to the highest risk properties, is unsustainable. It's a stopgap measure that is destined to collapse as billion-dollar floods shift from being once-in-a-generation events to annual occurrences. The system is broken. The safety Ontario took for granted for over 50 years was an illusion. It was a brilliant solution to a problem that no longer exists in its original form. We are now facing a completely new threat, one born of our own making. A threat of pluvial flooding in concrete cities, amplified by a changing climate and obscured by a thick fog of outdated information and willful ignorance. The billion-dollar flood of 2024 wasn't a warning. It was a demonstration. It was a preview of what happens when the water comes and the maps are lying. The great irony is that Ontario had the answer. After Hurricane Hazel, the province built a legacy of proactive, science-based risk management. It led the continent. That legacy of foresight has been squandered, replaced by a dangerous complacency. The tools we use to protect ourselves have become the blinders that prevent us from seeing the new, more complex danger we now face. The third straw in Las Vegas was a $1.4 billion bet on engineering. It was a physical solution to a physical problem. Ontario's problem is different. It's a problem of information, a problem of political will, a problem of confronting an uncomfortable truth that will have massive financial consequences. The solution isn't to drill a deeper tunnel. The solution is to draw an honest map. And then, to have the courage to act on what that map tells us. That action will be painful. It will mean telling people their homes are at risk. It will mean rethinking development. It will mean investing billions in resilient infrastructure, in restoring wetlands, in building a province that is designed for the climate of the 21st century, not the 1980s. The cost of inaction, as the summer of 2024 showed us, is already being paid. It's being paid in ruined basements, in lost family photos, in the quiet desperation of homeowners staring at a bill they cannot pay. The clock is ticking. The water is rising. And somewhere, in a municipal office, a developer is about